What is up, everyone? We are back for another breakdown video where we will be taking a deep dive into all of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC Fight Night. Ciryl Gane versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And big shout out to one of the members on my website who came to me earlier in the week. He was like, "Hey Chris, you keep saying Ciryl Gane. His name ain't fucking Ciryl Gane, it's Ciryl Gane." So thank you for correcting me, beep beep, in my Jeep. I really appreciate it, because if you hadn't corrected me, I would have made this YouTube video called Ciryl Gane, or called Ciryl Gane all the way through the video. I had tons of comments from people calling me a fucking dumbass. So I really appreciate it, beep beep, in my Jeep. And hopefully I will be able to get Ciryl Gane's name right throughout the rest of this video. So we're going to be taking a deep dive into that matchup. It's a great heavyweight fight, and we'll also be taking a deep dive into all of the other fights on the main card from a betting perspective to hopefully help you guys make better betting decisions. Now, as ever, if you'd like to watch breakdown videos on all the other fights on the card, the prelim fights, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below, and you can find breakdown videos for the rest of the fights there. But sit back, relax for the next hour, where we'll be going deep on some of these matchups. And we do have a pretty juicy bet for this card. The last few events have been a little bit dead for betting. That Blades Lewis card wasn't great for pre-fight bets. The Usman Burns card wasn't great for pre-fight bets. This one isn't great either, but I do think there is at least one very strong position on this card. Now, going into this weekend's card, I feel good. I'm not going to lie, I feel good. It's been a very good February for me. Live bets are doing great, up about just under 10 units on live bets so far this month. Official pre-fight bets are doing pretty good, up about 3 units, I think, this month on official pre-fight bets. And the lab bets have absolutely crushed this month. What I would say is that if you guys didn't know, I do post weekly updates now every Monday, where you could kind of see how I'm performing, where I go over my profit and loss on my live bets, pre-fight bets, lab bets, prop bets, everything from the previous week. You can see I put a video up Monday. Every Monday I basically drop one. I've done it for the last 3 or 4 weeks now. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here. So if you'd like to keep up to date with how I'm doing on a weekly basis in terms of profit and loss performance, go check it out. I also talk about, the fights, kind of like recap some of the fights on each of the cards as well. So if you're interested in that, check it out. The videos aren't getting many views, so I just thought, maybe you guys don't know I'm doing them. You can see they get much less views than the prop bet live streams and the breakdown videos. So maybe you guys aren't aware I'm putting them out. There you go. You can go watch them if you want to. Of course, no pressure. And this is the stage in the video, the part in the video where we try and do a business deal. You guys love those prop bets. Last weekend, we grinded out a profit from those prop bets that I covered in the live stream. We talked about that in that video that I put out on Monday that you guys should go check out. Prop bets are profitable. They produced a profit last week, and we came really close to hitting a few huge winners. That Imavov versus Phil Hawes prop bet on Imavov to win in round 3 at big underdog odds. That almost hit. Hawes was in big trouble in round 3. And Casey O'Neill to win by submission at 9.0 plus 800. That almost hit as well. O'Neill was fishing for that submission on the ground, had Dobson in some bad positions on the ground, but ended up getting the stoppage by ground and pound instead. So we only made a small profit on those props, but if things would have gone slightly different, it could have been a monster profit. So if you want another prop bet live stream this weekend, you already know what to do. I'm not asking for a lot. If this video gets 200 likes, which is a very reasonable ask, if the video gets 200 likes, I will do another prop bet live stream this Saturday. And if you don't know what a prop bet is basically a highly specific outcome, such as Ciryl Gane to win by submission at 5.5. That would be considered a prop bet. So there you go. And I would actually recommend that one. Ciryl Gane to win by submission, pretty good at 5.5. The reasons we'll be covering in the video later on. So now, let's get into it. What are you waiting for? Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 5,000 subs by the end of March. Please help me, and I will repay you by talking shit about cage fights for the next hour. Let's get into it. So the first fight that I want to talk about is going to be Alex Caceres against Kevin Croom, the hard-hitting hillbilly. Interesting. If you watch his debut against Roosevelt Roberts, definitely looked hard-hitting, but his other fights, not so much. Didn't look particularly dangerous in his other fights. So what I'm going to do, let's quickly just go over some X factors, and then I'm going to play some footage of Croom in the background while I give my thoughts on this one. So Croom, 33 years old, 5'11", with a 73-inch reach. Alex Caceres, 32 years old, 5'10", with a 73.5-inch reach. So let's get into this fight between Caceres and Croom. If we look at the odds, Kevin Croom currently around about a 2.70 underdog, right? Which is plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. If we look at the odds on Caceres, he's currently around about 1.48, which is minus 208 for an implied probability of 68%. So it's a very steep price to pay here on Alex Caceres. Now, when we look at this matchup, you know, we all know what Alex Caceres brings to the table, right? He's been in the UFC for a very long time. He has, you know, reasonably good striking, you know, fights long, good footwork, good movement, throws a wide range of strikes. He's also tough as nails. If we have a look at Alex Caceres' record, he's had almost 30 pro fights, and I don't think the guy has ever been knocked out. I could be wrong, but if we take a look at his record, he's lost 12 times, but he lost there by submission, decision, submission, decision. So he got knocked out there by Rivera, but submitted there, submitted, decisions. So in 30 pro fights, Caceres has only ever been knocked out one time. So we know Caceres is tough as nails. We know he's got a very good chin. And to be fair, even though he's got a bit of a goofy fighting style, we also know that he's pretty good defensively. Caceres' biggest weakness has always been his takedown defense and ground game, right? You know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, which is why I think so many people are on Kevin Croom in this matchup. Kevin Croom, I would say, is primarily a grappler. You know, he did manage to knock Roosevelt Roberts down, which hurt Roosevelt Roberts bad enough for Croom to be able to lock in this choke and submit him in his debut. But for the most part, despite knocking Roberts down, I would say Croom is a grappler. So obviously straight away, when people see a grappler face someone like Caceres, who has bad takedown offense and a bad ground game, if they see the grapplers at underdog odds, immediately they're going to start to think, you know, there's value on the underdog, who's a grappler, right? He should be able to take Caceres down, causing trouble on the ground. But I've got to be honest, and this is a very, very long video file, so I'm not going to be able to show you tons of evidence here, but I'm not that impressed by Croom's grappling. A better illustration of why Kevin Croom's grappling is not that impressive will be if you go and check out his fight from FAC 3 against Anderson Hutchinson. We'll see a little bit of it here, but Croom's weaknesses in terms of his grappling are more present and more obvious against Hutchinson. So if we look at Croom here, we can see he drives in early in this first round with a nice body lock takedown. But one thing I would say about Croom is that he really appears to lack physicality with his grappling. And what I mean by that is he's very, very good at timing, you know, body lock takedown entries, double leg takedown entries, but he just doesn't seem very strong in grappling positions, and his opponents tend to be able to work out of, takedowns he shoots on them or positions he puts them in quite easily, which is a strange one because he does hit quite hard, but that power and strength and physicality just doesn't really transition well into his grappling. And we see a little bit of it here. You know, he's driven Benjelani into the cage. You know, Benjelani's a very inexperienced fighter, but all he does is get to this overhook on the left side, the underhook on the right side, and he's just easily able to move Croom around in the clinch. Remember, Benjelani's a kickboxer. He's wearing the Muay Thai shorts. He trains at Rufus Sport. Benjelani's takedown offense and ground game isn't great. Croom out grapples him in this fight, which is why Croom ends up winning. But you could just see Ben Jelani's able to just move Croom around in this clinch position very, very easily. And Croom really, really lacks physicality to his grappling. Like, you can just see it here. He's very physically weak. And so this is an issue for him against Alex Caceres, because Caceres does appear to be making huge improvements to his takedown offense and grappling. We saw it in his fight against Chase Hooper. Hooper got in really deep on his legs several times, and Caceres was able to easily get those underhooks in play and scramble out of there. We can see it again here. Croom driving Ben Jelani into the cage, trying to hit that outside trip. But look at how comfortable Ben Jelani is. He just gets that underhook on the right side, easily digs an underhook on the left side, and he's not in any danger here. Croom is nowhere near a takedown. And look at how easily Ben Jelani is able to work out of that clinch position. Again, Croom coming forward, takedown entry way too high above Ben Jelani's hips. And Ben Jelani just very, very comfortable here. Look at how easily he just tosses Croom to the ground. This is a kickboxer that trains at Rufus Sport. This is not a grappler. Ben Jelani is a very, very low-level grappler. So this is significant for me because, you go back, you look at Alex Caceres' past fights. If we look back at his record, dating back to, I would say maybe pre-Steven Peterson, right? Pre-Steven Peterson, Caceres was one of these guys that, pretty easy to take down, pretty easy to hold down, pretty easy to cause big trouble on the ground. For whatever reason, since July 2019, Caceres appears to have made big improvements to his takedown defense and ground game. And I honestly think it comes down to concentration. If we look at Alex Caceres, I know that he's not doing as much training at the MMA lab anymore. But for the vast majority of Alex Caceres' MMA career, when he was training at MMA lab, realistically, he was training at a predominantly grappling-based gym, right? The MMA lab is a grappling gym. A lot of high-level grapplers have come out of MMA lab. Most of the guys at MMA lab have got decent takedown offense, decent ground game. And for that reason, Alex Caceres was a little bit of a black sheep at the MMA lab in terms of he was one of the very few fighters in the UFC coming out of MMA lab that wasn't a grappler and didn't have very good takedown offense and didn't have a very good ground game. But it appears that was just down to, like I say, a lack of concentration, where when you go back and you'd watch Alex Caceres' fights, he just wouldn't really focus that much on defending the takedown, in terms of if someone were to shoot in on his legs, he'd be more focused on throwing short strikes or elbows or knees instead of, looking to clear his legs, dig underhooks and actually address that takedown and stuff it. That seems to have changed. In his last couple fights against Austin Springer and Chase Hooper, every single time Caceres senses that his opponent is going to shoot a takedown, he's now very, very good at getting those underhooks in play early, clearing his legs and shutting the takedown down before his opponent even gets near him. And that's significant, because when someone shuts the door in your face at the first sign of your takedown entry, you need physicality to be able to drive through and tie them up. And from what I've seen, what you've seen here in this first round between Croom and Ben Jelani, Croom doesn't have that physicality to relentlessly drive through and push someone like Caceres into the cage. Caceres is deceptively athletic and deceptively strong. So I think that in the last couple of fights, we've seen Caceres flip a switch where, he was taken down and submitted very easily by Steven Peterson. Takedown and submitted easily by Croom Gracie. Taken down easily and put in some bad positions against Steven Peterson. And I just think Caceres is one of these guys that's maybe taking his career a little bit more seriously now. And he's learned that he can use his striking in reverse to read his opponent's entry, to see when that takedown entry is coming and stuff it and deal with it before his opponents get near enough to him where they can actually put him in a position where he can be taken down. So you see here Kevin Croom very weak off his back, really lacking in physicality, not the best offensive wrestler, sloppy striking, and Croom also tends to slow down a lot as the fight goes on, which is a bit of a concern because we know Alex Caceres is a cardio machine. So what I would say with this matchup is, I'm just not impressed by Croom. Past the first round, he doesn't look that dangerous standing, and even if in round one he does have a little bit of power in his hands, we know that Caceres has only been knocked out one time in 30 pro fights, so the probability of Croom hurting Caceres standing, knocking him out, pretty unlikely. Croom also slows down as the fight goes on. Caceres is a cardio machine. And on top of that, Croom's offensive wrestling's not great. And Caceres has made big improvements to his takedown offense very recently. What I would say is when we look at the odds, it becomes very, very difficult to bet this fight. Because I'm not seeing enough for Croom to make me want to bet him. I just don't rate him. I don't think he's very good. I don't think his grappling's very good for a grappler. What I will say is when Croom does get fights to the ground and he does establish dominant positions, he is quite dangerous on the ground. That's where his physicality comes back. He's one of these weird grapplers who lacks physicality trying to take his opponents down, lacks physicality and athleticism off his back. But if he manages to get into top position or take his opponent's back, his grappling control is pretty good. So this is one of those fights where I wouldn't bet Croom because I don't think he's very good. And I think there's a really good chance Caceres can keep this fight standing and outstrike Croom. On top of that, because Croom tends to slow down as the fight goes on, even if Croom does get Caceres down in the first round, if he doesn't finish Caceres with a submission in round 1, I don't feel Croom's going to have the energy in the second and third to take Caceres down. Because Caceres is very fresh in the second and third, he doesn't gas. Whereas Croom becomes flatter and more predictable in round 2 and 3, which will make it easier for Caceres to see Croom's takedown entries coming. And of course, if Croom lacks physicality in the first round, which you've just seen in his performance against Benjelani, he's really going to lack physicality into the second and third when he starts to get tired. So when I look at this fight, I look at it and I go, do you know what? It's a tough fight for Croom. It's unlikely he knocks Caceres out. And it's unlikely he's going to be able to take Caceres down into the second and third round. Therefore, if I want to bet this fight, I'm really betting on the probability of Croom submitting Caceres in round 1. I see that as quite a low probability outcome. Croom's decent on the ground, but he's not like fucking Chrome Gracie. So I don't want to bet Croom here. On the flip side, we absolutely know that Caceres' biggest weakness is his takedown defense and ground game. We know that Croom is primarily a grappler that will want to get this fight to the ground. And so, from my perspective, it's not smart to bet on a big favourite like Alex Caceres when we know his biggest weakness is Kevin Croom's biggest strength. Personally, from researching this one, I don't believe Croom is going to be able to use that strength to get a win here. However, it would be negligent of me to bet Caceres as a big favourite, knowing he's weak in an area that Croom is strong. So I'm going to pass on this one. I know a lot of people are on Croom here. When I was live streaming my research for this fight, a lot of people were announcing that they were betting Croom. It's interesting to me. I would definitely say this is a dog or pass fight. But if you're thinking of betting Kevin Croom this week, I would just strongly recommend you go and check out his fight against Anderson Hutchinson. And bear in mind, he had a really big size advantage over Hutchinson. And so he should have been able to use his physicality to out-muscle Hutchinson in grappling positions, and I personally feel he failed miserably. Go check out that fight. It's on UFC Fight Pass, and if you still feel confident in Croom after watching that, go for it. But personally, I don't like it. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Let's move on to the next one. We're now going to talk about Jimmy Rivera against Pedro Munhoz. Now, when it comes to fight research, I don't ever feel I'm wrong on anything. I gotta be honest with you. And some people think that's like an arrogant or a cocky thing to say. But I would explain it differently. I would basically say that fight research is a very... it's like a very black and white thing. It's not really ambiguous. In terms of... I look at fight research in terms of... If I open my window and I ask you to stare out and I ask you what the colour of the grass is outside, I'd expect you to say green, and I would say green, because when we look at grass, it's quite obvious it's green. I look at fight research in the same way. If you understand MMA, every single fight you research, you should be able to come to pretty much the same conclusion as anyone else that's watching it, because the footage doesn't lie. And so what I really like about the way we research fights is that we do it as a big group. And that means that it's very, very hard to miss key details. If there's 50 or 60 of us researching every UFC fight, it's almost impossible for us to miss key details which could dictate the outcome of a fight. Because someone's going to pick those details out. Like in every one of my fight research sessions on Twitch or on my website, I never miss anything because someone's always like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So it's very hard to miss details. So I fully trust in my research that we're right, like almost all the time. And I just had to explain that because something a little bit different and a little bit worrying happened with this matchup. So you may not want to take my advice on this one, is what I'm trying to say. Basically, what I'm trying to say, that's a really long-winded way of me saying, when I research a fight on Twitch or on my website, 90% of the people 90% of the people watching the live stream agree with my opinion because we've all watched the same thing, right? You'll get a couple dickheads that probably aren't watching the footage, probably aren't paying attention, that'll go the other way. But 90% of people are on the same side as me. That's why when I talk you through the Alex Caceres versus Kevin Croom fight, I'm very, very confident that I'm giving you good advice because I know 90% of the people, in that live stream agreed with me because we all saw the same footage. We agreed that Caceres was the right side to be on. What's very concerning about this fight is for the first time in a long time, the majority of people watching the live stream disagreed with my opinion on this one. So because of that, I'm in a situation where I don't know if I'm right on this one, and because a lot of people disagreed with me, and that never happens, usually everyone agrees with me, because not everyone, but because the majority of people are disagreeing with me on this fight, I'm taking a lot of caution, because I feel there's a pretty good chance that I'm wrong with what I'm about to say. So take my breakdown for this fight with a pinch of salt, because I might be missing something here. Usually I'm very confident in the advice I give you. I'm not so sure about this one because so many people disagreed with the things that I was saying. So do your own research. Anyway, Jimmy Rivera against Pedro Munhoz. We've currently got Jimmy Rivera at around about favourite odds, which means that he's currently around about slight favourite odds, which is 1.67, which is minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. And if we look at the odds on this fight, we can see that Munhoz currently around about 2.25, which is plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. So Rivera and Munhoz, where do we begin on this one? So, for me, this is a very, very difficult fight to kind of predict because we don't know what strategy Jimmy Rivera is going to employ. Jimmy Rivera is such a high-level striker that there's lots of different ways that he can approach this matchup. We know that Pedro Munhoz has a very, very predictable style of fighting. He likes to come forward, cut the cage off, put a lot of pressure on you, and force you to fight in an uncomfortable range, where he just throws a really high volume of strikes, hammers you with leg kicks, and throws big combinations to try and outwork you and out-hustle you. The problem with Pedro Munhoz's style is that he is very predictable in that, he's like a Nate Diaz. He just relies on his ability to come forward, rely on his chin, and rely on his ability to break you down and wear you down over 3 rounds. Now, that's not going to happen with Jimmy Rivera because we know Jimmy Rivera has got a brilliant gas tank. We're not going to see Pedro Munhoz put such a pace on Rivera that he's going to fade. However, when I went back and watched Jimmy Rivera's fight against Peter Yan, I was kind of blown away by how easy it was to back Rivera up and force him to fight in an uncomfortable range, and how it was easy to back Rivera up and trap him against the cage. The most concerning thing about the Peter Yan fight for me was that Yan didn't really do anything, and yet he was still able to force Rivera onto the back foot quite easily. Let me show you. If we look at the stats on this fight, we can see that Yan landed a relatively low number of strikes. We take a look at this and go round by round. We can see that, Yan only landed, 14 strikes in round 1, which is really low. 18 strikes in round 3, which is pretty low. And 24 strikes in round 2, which is pretty low. So, in the bantamweight division, the average number of strikes landed per round is about 25 to 30 strikes. So we can see Yan was well under average, in these rounds. And on top of that, if we take out body and leg strikes, which are generally for Jan more range-finding strikes, Jan is looking to use leg strikes and body strikes to set you up for his power head strikes. We can see Jan's volume of head strikes was really, really low. And that's significant for me because despite the fact that Jan didn't really land much, he was able to force Rivera under the back foot very easily, trap Rivera in an uncomfortable range against the cage, and basically force Rivera to fight in a state of panic where Rivera was trapped with his back square to the cage, so he could only move left and right to evade Jan's strikes when he came forward. And obviously, Rivera got dropped twice in this fight. And a big reason why Rivera got dropped twice is because his striking defense is very much reliant on footwork. If we think of the majority of Jimmy Rivera's fights, he's in the middle of the octagon and he's bouncing in and out of his opponent's range, right? In and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. Great footwork. And he has a really good ability to read his opponent. So that, if we think this is Rivera, this is Jan, if they're in the middle of the octagon, every time Jan comes forward like this to attack, Rivera can just move back and slip the shot. But because Jan was forcing Rivera all the way back against the cage, and Rivera had his back tight to the cage, I don't know if you can see, imagine the cage is the microphone, right? Rivera with his back tight to the cage. When Jan was coming forward in this range, Rivera couldn't move back because the microphone was blocking him. So he could only go left or right. And the problem was, Jan was basically anticipating whether he was going to go left or right and catching him with big power strikes and knocking him down. Why is this significant? This is significant because Jan put Rivera under the back foot and trapped him in this range extremely easily, and that is exactly what Pedro Munhoz will look to do. Munhoz wants to come forward, force Rivera under the back foot, trap him in an uncomfortable range so that he can only move left or right. You take one of his big weapons away from him, or one of his big shields, I guess, one of his big defensive tactics, take that away from him because Rivera can no longer move back to slip the shot. So this is a very interesting one because on one hand you can look at it and you can go, well, Jan's an amazing boxer. He's a much better boxer than Pedro. Maybe Rivera was showing Jan a lot of respect in this fight, and therefore that's why Jan had a lot more success pushing Rivera under the back foot, but Munhoz won't have the same amount of success because Munhoz isn't as good as Jan. But I'm not sure about that because Peter Yan threw a really low volume of strikes in that fight, and the vast majority of strikes were range-finding strikes. If you go back and watch it, Jimmy Rivera was winning that fight by outstriking Yan. He just kept getting caught and eating big shots. So my concern here is, I'm not saying Munhoz is as good of a striker or as good as a boxer as Jan, but styles make fights, and from a stylistic point of view, Munhoz will likely find it easier to put Rivera on the back foot in a defensive shell, because Jan was doing it with forward pressure and footwork, whereas Munhoz is going to be doing it with forward pressure, footwork, and strikes, which means Rivera is going to be even under even more pressure to move back and get trapped, because against Jan, he wasn't being fought back with volume. He wasn't being pushed back with volume. He was just being pushed back with movement and Jan's ability to cut the cage off. Munhoz can do that, but he can also land damaging strikes as well. So that's an interesting one for me. That Jan fight is a big, big, big red flag, and I wouldn't ignore it. And I definitely wouldn't, if you're on Rivera in this fight, I wouldn't just look at it and go, Jan's better than Munhoz. There's no way that Munhoz is going to be able to do what Jan could do. I wouldn't be so sure, because from a stylistic point of view, I think Munhoz can. But of course, that's really the only time we'd ever really seen Rivera put in that position, because he's such a high-level striker. Guys like Dodson's a counter-striker, Stayman's a grappler, Almeida's just a fucking wild horse. That fight was a war. So we hadn't really seen Rivera forced to fight in that range before. It was the first time we'd seen someone like Jan do that to him. But Munhoz does have a style well built to doing that to someone like Rivera. Aljamain kind of put him into a defensive shell, but that was largely because of the threat of Aljamain's, grappling to put Rivera into a defensive shell. So this one's interesting to me. On top of that, I do worry that Rivera is a little bit fragile. When you come forward and exchange with Rivera, he's looking to plant his feet, sit down on his shots and fire back. He's looking to get into big exchanges. But because of that, he does get rock dropped and wobbled a lot. We saw him get dropped twice by Jan. He got wobbled 3 or 4 times by Thomas Almeida. And we know Pedro Munhoz has a granite chin. He's extremely tough. And he loves to bait his opponents into exchanging. One of the reasons why he keeps coming forward with loads of pressure is because he trusts in his chin over his opponent. And he wants to bait them into those big exchanges. And we've seen Rivera get dropped and wobbled many times when he looks to exchange with his opponent. So, you know, I'll just cover it off very quick. For me, it's irrelevant. Obviously, we know that I've got to cover this, because otherwise people in the comments will be like, oh, you didn't even talk about their first fight. Pedro Munhoz obviously lost to Jimmy Rivera. He lost a split decision back in 2015. This fight's completely irrelevant to me. I don't care about this fight. To me, it's pointless. We can't learn anything from this fight, because back in 2015, Munhoz was predominantly a BJJ guy. He had a questionable gas tank. His boxing was nowhere near as good as it is now. Since 2015, Munhoz has gone to train full-time at American Top Team. He's a different fighter now. He's much better than he was back in 2015. And Rivera's improved as well, so we can't really learn anything about this fight. It was 5 years ago. It's much more valuable to assess the skills that Munhoz and Rivera have shown us in their recent matchups. So when we look at this fight, I do think it's potentially a difficult stylistic matchup, Rivera, because I don't think Rivera is going to be able to hurt Munhoz standing. Munhoz's chin is brilliant. It's going to be hard for Rivera to outstrike Munhoz because Munhoz pushes a high pace. And, you know, Rivera's shown he's pretty easy to back up and pressure against Peter Yan. So, what's the issue with Munhoz, right? There is one big problem with Munhoz, which bugs me about this guy, and we've seen it play out predominantly in his last 2 fights. We also kind of saw it against John Dodson. The one big issue that I do have with Pedro Munhoz is that he becomes frustrated easily. It's what cost him against Frankie Edgar, Aljamain Sterling, and John Dodson. So what do I mean by that? Well, Munhoz likes to come forward, put a lot of pressure on his opponents, and force them into basically exchanging with him. If they refuse to play that game, his output falls off a cliff and he starts to headhunt. So what Munhoz wants from you is basically exactly what Cody Garbrandt did. Munhoz wants to come forward and put so much pressure on you that in order to alleviate that pressure, you stand your ground and you get into exchanges with him. He wants this because Munhoz is a good boxer and he's got a good chin. He wants these exchanges because he's betting on his chin against yours. So if Munhoz comes forward and you plant your feet and you fire back and you get into exchanges with him, he loves it. That's his opportunity to win those boxing exchanges and outstrike you. Munhoz gets into trouble when guys don't play that game. When Munhoz comes forward, looks to open up with strikes, and instead of them standing their ground and trying to back him up with strikes, they just move away. And then Munhoz goes to cut the cage off, and they'll chip away at him, and then he'll come forward to bait him into another exchange, and then they'll move away. And they'll chip away at him, and then he comes forward, looking to initiate another exchange, and then they circle away. That's the style Munhoz struggles against. Frankie Edgar did it, right? Frankie was on the outside circling away. Munhoz came forward. Frankie would chip away. As soon as Munhoz came into boxing range to load up on big power strikes, Edgar got on his bike and moved away. The Aljamain Sterling fight. Munhoz would come forward. Sterling would pepper him with like his long straight punches, long teep kicks, range-finding kicks. And then when Munhoz would walk through those long straight punches and those range-finding kicks to get into boxing range where he could land, Sterling would be like, fuck this, mate, I'm gone. And he would circle away. And we just see Munhoz getting more and more frustrated as the fight goes on. And when Munhoz gets more and more frustrated, his output drops. To the extent that you'll see this. In round 1, if you counter-strike and play the role of Matador against Munhoz, what will happen is he'll come forward in the boxing range, right? And he'll throw 3, 4, 5 strike combination when he gets in the boxing range. Now, if as he comes in the boxing range, you circle away, those 3, 4, 5 strikes that he throws in combination will largely miss, but he's very good at cutting the cage off. So if you circle to your right, he'll just come with you, and then he'll come forward again in the boxing range, throw 3, 4, 5 strike combinations, and that cycle will repeat over and over again. Munhoz will go through the cycle of cutting the cage off, coming into boxing range, letting the combo go. If you get caught flat-footed, he's looking to box you up and exchange with you in the pocket, like we saw with what happened in the Cody Garbrandt fight. If you circle away, he keeps trying to cut the cage off. What you notice about Munhoz is, as the fight goes on, he becomes more and more frustrated. So, for example, you go back and watch the Edgar fight or the Sterling fight. If you get to a position where Munhoz has come forward for a whole round, and every single time Munhoz gets in the boxing range for a whole round, you circle away, he starts to get really fucking frustrated, to the point where into the second and third round, when he comes forward in the boxing range, instead of him throwing 3, 4, 5 strike combinations, he'll start to load up on one big power right hand. And that makes him very predictable and very ineffective, because when he's coming forward, cutting the cage off and throwing 3, 4, 5 strike combinations, his opponent's obviously got to read and evade 3, 4, 5 strikes. When he's coming forward and loading up on big single power strikes to try and take you out, you've only really got to focus on one weapon, basically getting out of the way of one threat. So Munhoz becomes more predictable as the fight goes on and easier to deal with. And it's just he gets frustrated. And it's happened in his last 2 fights. So this is really relevant here because, and this is why this is such a difficult fight to predict for me, because both guys are kind of well positioned to cause the other problems in terms of, when Munhoz comes forward, fights his way into boxing range and pressures his opponent, he wants them to do exactly what Jimmy Rivera did against Peter Yan. He wants them to freeze flat-footed against the cage, so that when he comes forward, they're against the cage for him to unload with his 3, 4, 5 strike combinations. He doesn't want his opponent to do what Frankie Edgar did or Aljamain Sterling did, get on their bike and circle away. So that's super interesting to me, and it's why I lean Munhoz here in a clear dog or pass situation. Because if Rivera shows up and fights like he did against Peter Yan, every time Munhoz comes forward, Rivera is going to be trapped with his back against the cage, and Munhoz is going to be able to unload on him with those combinations. And I think in boxing range, Munhoz is a better boxer than Rivera. As a total package, Rivera is a better striker than Munhoz, but in boxing range, Munhoz is better. Now, the risk comes in because we know Rivera has great footwork, great striking, and he's incredibly intelligent. Rivera will have gone back, looked at the things that he did wrong in that Peter Yan fight, and he will have been working on them. Very likely Rivera's improved. Very likely he comes into this fight with a different game plan. Realistically, Peter Yan's style of fighting is very similar to Pedro Munhoz's. So the fact that Rivera went the distance with Yan means he's already pretty well prepared to deal with Munhoz's style. It's kind of like the Peter Yan fight's kind of like a dress rehearsal for the Pedro Munhoz fight. And so this is a very difficult one for me, and I just need to move on and stop talking about it, because if Rivera shows up and performs like he did against Peter Yan, I think Munhoz wins, and I think he causes him big trouble. And you know what? I actually think there's a good chance Munhoz knocks Rivera out, which I know a lot of you are going to be like, no way, he went the distance with Yan. Rivera gets dropped a lot, guys. He gets wobbled a lot. But Rivera does have great footwork, great movement. He's very good defensively. And so, if Rivera comes into this fight, having learnt from the mistakes he made against Peter Yan, and he looks at the blueprint Frankie Edgar and Aljamain Sterling wrote on how to beat Munhoz, I think Rivera can do very well. If he takes the approach where every time Munhoz comes forward, I'm not going to look to win those boxing exchanges when he's looking to trap me against the cage. I'm going to circle away and chip away at him from kickboxing range in the middle of the octagon. If I utilise that strategy, I'm likely to do very well. But if he fights like he did against Petr Yan, I think Jimmy Rivera gets smoked. So I don't know how this one plays out. And like I say, the vast majority of people watching the live stream disagreed with me. And they lean towards Rivera. But I do think this is dog or pass. It's a very complicated fight. It's a brilliant fight. I can't wait to see how it plays out. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And let's fucking move on. Because I've been talking about this fight for way too long. Now it's been pass, right? It's been boring up until this point. It's been boring. You know, I know some of you want action, you want the picks. I think there's a very good bet on this fight, guys. So, Mayra Bueno Silva against Montana De La Rosa. We've currently got Mayra Bueno Silva at odds of around 1.71, which is minus 141 for an implied probability of 58%. And if we look at the odds on Montana De La Rosa, she's currently around about an average of 2.20, which is plus 120 for an implied probability of 45%. Now, earlier this month, I recommended a bet on a gentleman called Clay Guida, right? We talked about this in the... was it this card? No, it wasn't this card. We talked about this bet in the breakdown video, the YouTube video for this fight, where we were saying that the odds on Guida versus Johnson were just way off because Clay Guida had extreme advantages in the area that Michael Johnson was weak, and therefore Guida should not have been a big underdog. He obviously came through for us in a big way and won this fight. I hope you made money on that. You're fucking welcome. We have exactly the same fight. Exactly the same fight here between Mayra Bueno Silva and Montana De La Rosa. It's exactly the same stylistic matchup. The bookies have made the same mistake again. Now, that doesn't mean Montana De La Rosa is going to win. But Montana De La Rosa has an extreme advantage in the area that Mayra Bueno Silva is weak. And therefore, whenever you see an underdog with an extreme advantage over their opponent in an area their opponent is weak, you should often consider betting the underdog, because it usually means you've got a great value bet. So Guida came through for us in a big way at the beginning of this month. The odds were obviously a lot more generous on Clay Guida. But with Montana De La Rosa at around 2.20, I still just think this is tremendous value. So if you want a more deep breakdown, I did a 30-minute breakdown on the reasons why Montana De La Rosa is a good bet here. If you want a more deep breakdown, go to my website, MMAfuckingbettingtips.com. Why are you not already a member of my website? Go to my website and watch the breakdown video on my site for De La Rosa versus Bueno Silva, and you will feel very confident in De La Rosa. That's all I'm going to say based on the breakdown video. I can't make that breakdown video on YouTube, but go watch it on there. I'll try and give you as great an explanation as to why De La Rosa is a good bet here as possible. Now, don't mistake great bet for safe bet or great bet for solid bet. Remember what we were saying when we broke down Guida versus Johnson. This is a fight of extremes. If the fight stays standing, Silva has an extreme advantage over De La Rosa. If this fight stays standing, De La Rosa is screwed. And you know what? Silva's striking is so nasty, there's actually a good chance that De La Rosa will get knocked out if this fight stays standing. However, Silva is so bad on the ground that if De La Rosa gets takedowns, she's going to be able to rack up an enormous amount of top control. So when we look at the odds on this fight, I just think a lot of wiki capping is going on. If we look at Silva's record, she's won, 3 of her last 4 fights by submission. And if we look at De La Rosa's record, she's struggled really bad against, dangerous strikers recently, right? We saw both Vivian Araujo and Andrea Lee keep the fight standing and just completely annihilate Montana De La Rosa on the feet. And I think a lot of wiki capping is going into these odds where people are looking at Araujo, they're looking at Andrea Lee, they're looking at what both these girls did to De La Rosa, and they're assuming Because Silva, you know, is a very, very dangerous striker. She moves very well. She's physically strong. They're assuming that Silva can do the same thing as what Araujo and Andrea Lee did. Remember what I said in the last breakdown video, and remember what I say every fucking week. The devil is in the detail, and styles make fights. That's why we crush. That's why going into this event, the end of this month, it doesn't matter how I do this week. I'm automatically in profit in February. Pre-fight bets crushed, live bets crushed, lab bets crushed. I can't lose money this month. I'm in profit. It's because we do the work, we do the research, and we're enabled to dig for positions that the wiki cappers miss, because fight records don't tell the whole story, because ultimately fights aren't fought on paper, they're fought in the cage. Classic wiki capping going on here. If you go back and watch Mayra Bueno Silva's fights against any of her 3 opponents in the UFC, Barella, Munhoz or Robertson, you'll see that her takedown defense is very, 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 very bad. If you shoot in on Silva, because she's got a base in Muay Thai, and because she's strong in the clinch, and because she's athletic, she's very, very good at stuffing that initial takedown entry. But because she doesn't have any defensive wrestling, if you drive through and chain wrestle, her takedown defense is dreadful. If you go back and check out her last 3 fights, she gives up extremely weak takedowns in all 3 fights. And what's even more notable is that Silva is terrible off her back. Now, I understand there will be people watching this who will be like, oh, how can you say she's terrible off her back? She submitted Robertson and Barella off her back. Look, guys, I get it. I get it. I get it. You know, she's thrown up a couple nasty submissions off her back. But if you go back and look at Silva, you'll see that she's incredibly weak off her back. If you take Silva down, she makes absolutely no effort to get back up to her feet. Go watch the fight against Munhoz, Robertson or Barella. When you take Silva down, it doesn't matter if you take her down in the middle of the octagon or against the cage where she's in a strong position to wall walk. She literally makes 0 effort to get back up to her feet. All she does is throw up long shot armbar attempts, which means if you take Silva down and you neutralize the threat of the armbar, you can easily rack up 2, 3, 4 minutes of top control time, however long there is left to go in the round while you're in top position. She is so weak off her back and so easy to control from top position. So that's very different from Viviane Araujo and Andrea Lee. Because if we start with Andrea Lee, we know that Andrea Lee has got pretty good takedown defense. But Andrea Lee's one of these girls, and one of the rare fighters in the women's flyweight division, that when you take her down, and not even Valentina Shevchenko can do this. When you take Andrea Lee down, she immediately pops back up to her feet like a spring. Andrea Lee's ability to work her way back up to her feet is quite spectacular. It's very, very impressive. And she's probably the only girl in the flyweight division that can do that. She's incredibly difficult to hold down. So Montana De La Rosa hit multiple takedowns on Andrea Lee in this fight. If we look at the stats, I'm imagining she probably hit a good number, right? Let's take a look. Where are we? Let's go all the way back to this event. So if we look at De La Rosa and go to the Andrea Lee fight. Yeah, look at this. Look at this, guys. Fucking look at this. Just fucking look at this right now. Montana De La Rosa hit 5 takedowns on Andrea Lee. Okay? Put that in your head. Andrea Lee's takedown defense is much, much, much better than Mayra Bueno Silva's. Andrea Lee's takedown defense is an order of magnitude better than Mayra Bueno Silva's. Much better. We're talking light years ahead. But the difference between Andrea Lee and Mayra Bueno Silva is that when you take Andrea Lee down, she's immediately looking to clear her legs and either scramble over to the cage where she can wall walk, or clear her legs, get to her knees and stand back up. She's like a spring. I always talk about the Team Alpha Male fighters because as a gym, they're brilliant at it. If you think of guys like Chad Mendes, Uriah Faber, Cody Garbrandt, TJ Dillashaw, I know a couple of those guys don't train at Team Alpha Male anymore, but they came up training from Team Alpha Male, right? If you think about the guys that have trained at Team Alpha Male for a long time, the Danny Castillos, you take these guys down, they immediately pop back up to their feet like a fucking spring. As soon as they feel that canvas on their back, they're up. and that makes it very difficult for wrestlers like De La Rosa to establish a dominant position. Mayra Bueno Silva, completely different to Andrea Lee. When you take this girl down, she immediately rolls to her back, and she allows you to flatten her shoulders out on the canvas, which makes it very easy to take half guard and control this girl from top position. She's different to Andrea Lee, completely different. So remember what I said at the beginning of the video. Silva is so weak off her back that if you hit one takedown on her, you can rack up a massive amount of top control because she doesn't make any effort to get back up to her feet. De La Rosa was able to hit 5 takedowns on Andrea Lee, who has much better takedown defense than Silva. If De La Rosa can take Andrea Lee down, you bet your fucking ass she can take Silva down as well. Trust me on that, guys. Trust me on that. So this is a great stylistic matchup for De La Rosa. Araujo is much more difficult to take down because Araujo has got kind of like that bouncy capoeira style where she's always bouncing in and out of her opponent's range, stinging her opponent with jabs. She's very athletic. She's very good at reading her opponents, and Araujo's a strong wrestler herself. Silva got that traditional Muay Thai style, flat-footed, comes forward looking to basically just fucking kill you with knees, elbows and punches. But she's flat, she doesn't read her opponent very well when they're shooting takedown entries, and if you use chain wrestling against this girl, very easy to put her on her back. What I will say is that she's nasty as fuck standing. Vicious leg kicks, big power in her hands, very aggressive. De La Rosa has no striking defense, nothing offensively. If the fight stays standing, De La Rosa is screwed, and that's where the risks come from here. If De La Rosa can't get this fight to the ground, Silva is going to murder her. There is no question. However, De La Rosa is the underdog here. She's definitely got the grappling she needs to get this fight to the ground, and she's definitely got the skills she needs to rack up big control time on Silva, and her submission defense is pretty good as well. So Silva hitting these long shot submissions off her back, the arm bars aren't as likely, especially because she's done it twice. So if De La Rosa's done her homework on Silva, she'll know that when she takes Silva down, she needs to watch out for the arm bar, because that's what Silva looks for off her back. So anyway, do your own research. I'm no one's guru. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know, at the end of the day, make your own decisions on this. At the end of the day, I don't want to tell anyone what to do. But I will say at the very least, I think the odds are the wrong way round here. At the very least, I think De La Rosa deserves to be the slight favourite. And as a result, these odds are way off. And I think De La Rosa is a great bet. Not a safe bet, not a solid bet. There's a lot of risk. If the fight stays standing, De La Rosa's screwed. But styles make fights. De La Rosa is a very difficult style for Silva. So let me know what you think in the comments below. We now move on to the next one, where we will be talking about the fight between Nikita Krylov and Magomed Ankalaev. All right. And can we get a little bit of love as well? Can you hit that fucking like button for me? Because I've been talking shit about cage fighting for almost an hour. Hit the fucking like button for me. Hit the like button, man. We get 200 likes, we're going to do that prop bet live stream. And on top of that, you know what I mean? It wouldn't hurt you to hit the subscribe button while you're there. Let's get to 5,000 subs. I would really love to get to 5,000 subs. I'm like teetering on the edge. It would just be cool, like a little milestone. Going from 0 to 5,000. That would be pretty cool. If you could hook me up with a subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Let's talk about the fight between Nikita Krylov against, I was going to say Fabio Maldonado. We're not going to talk about the fight between Krylov and Maldonado, but we'll leave this in the background as we go through the fight between Krylov and Magomed Ankalaev. So while Magomedov is trying to find his testicles and push them back down from his stomach, we will look at the odds on this one. So Ankalaev currently around about a 1.29 favourite, which is minus 345 for an implied probability of 78%. That makes Ankalaev one of the biggest favourites on the card. And if we take a look at the odds on Krylov, currently floating around 3.75, which is going to be plus 275 for an implied probability of 27%. So Ankalaev, like I say, one of the biggest favourites on the card. And I don't really have too much to say on this fight. If I'm honest with you, I've spoken in depth about, all the fights on this card. I don't have a lot to say about the Krylov versus Ankalaev matchup. If the fight stays standing, Ankalaev's a brilliant boxer. Krylov has got a base in Kyokushin karate, where the kind of foundation for that Kyokushin karate style centers around kicks. Krylov has got a predominantly kicks-based style of striking, and also blitzing attacks. So you're not going to see Krylov standing in boxing range and kind of, trying to win boxing exchanges against his opponent, right? We can kind of see it here against Maldonado. Notice how, from that camera angle, it's pretty difficult to see if the camera angle, this is a better camera angle. This is a much better camera angle. So as the camera pans parallel, this is the kind of style of striking you see from Krylov, right? His style of fighting is he's either going to chip away at his opponent with long kicks from distance, or he's going to blitz in, attack him from like here, and then exit back out of a range where his opponent can land on him. And you'll see that here. Blitzes in, goes back out. Blitzes in, goes back out. Blitzes in, goes back out. And notice as he's back out, there's a real safe distance between him and his opponent, because Maldonado has to move forward a lot to get into a range where he can actually land on Krylov. Watch again. Very big distance, safe distance, blitzes in, goes back out. Big distance, big distance, big distance. Oh, see that there? Maldonado came forward, and that big distance just enables Krylov to see the attack come in. I went back too far, but that big distance, where is it? I might have just missed the opportunity, right? We have to go back much further. Watch, as Maldonado comes forward, you'll see Krylov move back. That big distance enables him to see his opponent come in. Watch. Maldonado comes forward any second, and Krylov moves back. That's basically what you see from Krylov's style of fighting. That's what he does. Ankalaev has got much more of a boxing style of fighting, where when Krylov comes forward with those blitzing attacks, Ankalaev's going to be looking to plant his feet, fire back, and counter him. And that could make this a potentially difficult stylistic matchup for Krylov, because notice as Krylov comes forward, more often than not, he's kind of got it programmed in his head what he's going to try and do, right? So what do I mean by that? When Krylov comes forward and blitzes his opponent, he's coming forward and throwing a pre-programmed combination, either like a leg kick to a jab or a leg kick to a right hook. He's coming forward and he's going to be throwing a head kick. He's coming forward with pre-programmed combinations from his Kyokushin karate background. Ankalaev, on the other hand, with his pure boxing style, is looking to read what Krylov is going to do when he comes forward and react to it, which makes Ankalaev way more dangerous in striking range, because Krylov is coming forward to attack Ankalaev, already in his mind coming forward, within his mind knowing what he wants to do, whereas Ankalaev is looking to read Krylov on the way in of that blitzing attack and basically load up on the left hand and knock him the fuck out. Is pretty much how Ankalaev was able to knock Cutelaba out in his last fight. If you go back and watch that, you'll see Cutelaba was coming forward with lots of pressure, and Ankalaev was just playing the role of Matador, circling away from him, and every time Cutelaba got into a range where Ankalaev could be hit, Ankalaev was looking to slip Cutelaba's shot and fire back with a big left hand. That style's dangerous for Krylov, because Krylov fights with his hands low, and every time he blitzes forward, he's more interested in attacking his opponent than reading what they're doing and worrying about protecting himself and defending himself. So if the fight stays standing, very, very difficult for Krylov. If the fight goes to the ground, I'm not so sure. Ankalaev has brilliant takedown defense, very, very difficult to hold down. Ankalaev is a high-level grappler, but against Paul Craig, it was like the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. This was the strangest tap to a submission I have ever seen. When Paul Craig caught Ankalaev in that triangle choke, Ankalaev immediately tapped. Literally within a second. It was the fastest tap I've ever seen. There was only 1 second left to go in the fight, and Ankalaev was up 3 rounds. It was just so weird to me. And so what this fight says to me, if you go back and you watch it, you just watch that 3rd round. It says to me that if you put Ankalaev in a bad position on the ground, you can make him quit. And that's significant because Krylov started out with his Kyokushin karate background, but his style has really evolved into being predominantly a grappler, to be fair. If we look at his last 5 fights, the Maldonado fight ended up going to the ground and involving a lot of grappling. So did the Blachowicz fight. So did the OSP fight. The Glover fight was a grappling match. And more recently, so was the Johnny Walker fight. And you know what? If it goes to the ground, I don't know what's going to happen. From a technical point of view, Ankalaev is a better grappler than Krylov. There's no mistake about it. And because Ankalaev's takedown offense and ground game is so good, it won't be easy for Krylov to get the fight to the ground. But what I will say is Krylov is game as fuck, he's tough as nails, and he's a blue-collar hustler. If the fight does go to the ground, I do think he can put Ankalaev in some bad positions and cause him some trouble on the ground. Because Ankalaev, in that Paul Craig fight, showed me he will quit if you put him in a bad position. And we've seen Krylov come very, very close to submitting Glover Teixeira. He had full back control on Teixeira. Forearm under the chin, deep rear naked choke, but Glover's tough as nails. He was able to fight out of it. You know, he had Glover mounted. And Glover is a very, very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. If someone like Nikita Krylov can obtain these positions on someone like Glover, you bet your fucking ass they can obtain these positions on Ankalaev as well. So when I look at these odds, Ankalaev, one of the biggest favourites on the card, is one of those fights where I completely understand the odds. Ankalaev, from a technical point of view, is a significantly better striker and grappler than Krylov. He's also got a great gas tank and he's tough as nails. However, there's no way I would be betting Ankalaev as a big favourite here, because Krylov's game, he's dangerous and he's scrappy. If the fight goes to the ground, Krylov has passed the victory. So this is not a fight that I'm interested in betting personally, but I do think this is a clear dog or pass matchup. I just don't see enough of a path to victory for Krylov for me to want to bet him, just because Ankalaev's better than him everywhere. So not too much to say on that one, but I hope it made sense to you. We'll now move on and talk about the main event. And I need a drink. 2 seconds. Getting very thirsty here. Now talk about the main event, which is going to be Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Ciryl Gane. So I've been super high on Ciryl Gane. I think he's absolutely brilliant. He's one of these heavyweights that doesn't fight like a heavyweight, and I mean that as a compliment. Ciryl Gane has an amazing gas tank, reasonably good everywhere. He's fast, he's strong, he's athletic, he moves very well. He fights like a welterweight, which is kind of scary considering he's 6'4", weighs 250 pounds, and he's got an 83-inch reach advantage. This guy fights like a welterweight. He's a very, 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 very dangerous heavyweight because of that. He has a huge speed and athleticism advantage over almost everyone else in the heavyweight division, and I'm super high on this guy. Ciryl Gane is just very well-rounded. Crazy how well-rounded he is for someone that has only got 7 pro MMA fights. It's kind of crazy. But he does have one big weakness here, which I do think could get him into trouble against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And let's be real, he only has one weakness. And that is, when he comes forward to attack his opponent, he is very, very vulnerable to counters. Ciryl Gane is very, very young in his MMA career. Only 7 pro MMA fights. And because of that, when he comes forward and attacks his opponent, he's not able to read them very well. He kind of freezes up a little bit. So what I mean by that is, when Gane comes forward and attacks, he kind of hesitates and freezes right in front of them, which gives his opponent a window of opportunity to land a big counter. Now, if we look at the previous guys that Gane has fought, none of them have been able to punish him for this. JDS came close a couple times, caught Gane with some big shots, but really couldn't make him pay. Tanner Boser couldn't make him pay because Tanner Boser doesn't really have any boxing. He's got a predominantly kicks-based style of striking. Same goes for Dontel Mays, much more of a kicker than a boxer. Same with Pessoa, Rafael Pessoa, much more of a kicker than a boxer. And these guys obviously pretty low level. So what I've seen from Ciryl Gane in the past is great offensive wrestling, very, very strong ground game, heavy top game, great footwork, great movement, great striking, really nice kicks, but very, very bad defensively when he gets into that boxing range. That's a pretty big issue when you're fighting someone like Jairzinho Rozenstruik, because Rozenstruik is a counter striker. If you go back and watch Rozenstruik's fight against Junior Dos Santos and Alistair Overeem, there's long periods of inactivity where Rozenstruik just doesn't do anything, right? That's because he doesn't like to lead. The Overeem fight and the JDS fight were very low volume, passive, flat matchups, because neither JDS nor Overeem wanted to lead either. So you find yourself in a bit of a game of chicken where Rozenstruik wants to counter strike and doesn't want to lead. So when he goes up against other counter strikers who don't want to lead, nothing happens. They both just end up staring at each other, waiting for the other to lose patience and make the first move. What you see from Rozenstruik, and is very, very evident in the JDS fight, is as soon as you attack Rozenstruik, he immediately explodes to life and looks to counter you and punish you for attacking him. It's very, 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 very significant here because Ciryl Gane has very high output for a heavyweight. Ciryl Gane is constantly attacking his opponent. He's constantly chipping away with leg kicks, body kicks, range-finding strikes, jabs. He isn't like Overeem and JDS. Overeem and JDS showed Rozenstruik a lot of respect. They fell into that game of fighting at a very slow pace, and so whenever they attacked him, Rozenstruik would explode to life and look to counter. Gane has high output, and he's constantly attacking, which could bring out the best in Rozenstruik here. Rozenstruik is like a sniper, very accurate, major power in his hands, and remember what we said, Gane is bad defensively. So when Gane comes forward and attacks Rozenstruik and Rozenstruik explodes into life to counter him, I do think Gane is at big risk of being knocked out here. So if we take a look at the odds, we can see Ciryl Gane currently floating around about 1.38, which is going to be minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%. And if we look at the odds on Jairzinho Rozenstruik, currently around about 3.10, which is plus 210 for an implied probability of 32%. We just described how Rozenstruik could cause Gane a problem. So is Rozenstruik an interesting bet to us? Well, the problem you've got with Rozenstruik is that his takedown defense and ground game is ultra bad. I wouldn't even say Rozenstruik is a white belt on the ground. This stat seems way off. It's saying his takedown defense is 75%. I'm not sure about that. If you've watched a Rozenstruik fight, you'll know his takedown defense is very bad. The most concerning thing about Rozenstruik is if you take him down, he has absolutely no idea how to defend himself on the ground. Both Junior Albini and Alistair Overeem passed this guy's guard like he'd never even taken a BJJ class. And if you take Rozenstruik to the ground, he is like a beached whale. He's a fish out of water. He's like a turtle on his back. And Gane is very, very, very dangerous on the ground. Even though we all consider Gane to be primarily a striker, if we look at his 7 career wins, we can see that 4 of them actually came by submission. Front choke, triangle choke, heel hook. And actually, that's not a submission, but he got a win on the ground and, through ground and pound. So the point I'm trying to make is, if the fight stays standing, Gane could be in some trouble here because his striker defense isn't great. However, the big ace up Gane's sleeve is that he's a very good offensive wrestler, very high level on the ground. Well, not very high level on the ground, but compared to Rozenstruik, light years ahead on the ground. And so this could be a very, very easy night's work for Gane, where all he's got to do is come out, get this fight to the ground and absolutely dominate Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik is at such a low level on the ground, and Gane is so dangerous on the ground, that if Gane were to take Rozenstruik down and he had 2-3 minutes to work in a round, I honestly don't see Rozenstruik surviving. I think Gane finishes him quite easily. So for that reason, I think the odds are exactly where they should be on this fight. Gane deserves to be a big favourite because he can dictate where the fight takes place with his grappling and he can dominate on the ground. However, because he's bad defensively and because he's primarily a striker that may choose to stand and strike against Rozenstruik for long periods in this matchup, it's dangerous to bet Gane is a big favourite because Rozenstruik is extremely dangerous, extremely accurate, extremely fast, extremely powerful standing, and therefore he has the skills to punish Gane for his defensive weaknesses standing. So I am going to pass on the main event, but maybe we'll dig up a good prop bet for it if you hit the like button and this video gets 200 likes. So thank you for watching. That is going to be it for this one. Leave a comment below and let me know what you thought about the breakdowns in this video. We went into a lot of depth on some of these matchups, so let me know what you think about the stuff I was saying. And hit the like button if this video gets 200 likes. We will do that prop bet live stream on fight day. And also hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And again, for the last time, if you would like to watch breakdown videos on all the other fights on this card, which I haven't covered in this video, all the prelim fights, head on over to MMABettingTips.com and join us. It's an absolute bargain. It's a great source of information, and I think you're going to like it there. So thank you for watching, everyone. Take care, and I will see you next week for the big one, UFC 259. Some incredible matchups on that card. I can't wait. Have a great weekend. I hope you crush it. I will see you all soon.